Edith Owen had lived on Maple Grove Avenue for 43 years. She'd raised 3 children in the modest Cape Cod house with the blue shutters, buried a husband, and watched the neighborhood transform from young families to a mix of retirees and ambitious millennials. At 76, she'd earned her routines, her comforts, and, most importantly, her parking spot. The spot in question wasn't technically hers. It was street parking, public domain, first come, first served. But for 4 decades, the space directly in front of her house had been Edith's spot. Everyone on the block knew it. The Johnsons knew it. The Martinez family knew it. Even the college kids who rented the converted duplex 3 doors down knew it. Everyone, apparently, except Garrett Mitchum. Garrett had moved into the renovated Victorian next door 8 months ago with his wife Chelsea, their designer dog, and an attitude that suggested the world had been waiting for his arrival. He drove a black Tesla Model X that he treated like a newborn child, and he had opinions about everything from the neighborhood's outdated lamppost designs to the lack of a community composting program. The parking wars began on a Tuesday in October. Edith had driven to her weekly physical therapy appointment for the hip replacement she'd had the previous fall. When she returned, carefully navigating the Buick LeSabre that had been her trusty companion since 2008, she found Garrett's Tesla occupying her spot. She circled the block twice. No other spaces. She ended up parking 3 houses down on the opposite side of the street, then limped home, her hip aching with each step. Probably just doesn't know the neighborhood customs yet, she told her daughter, Patricia, during their nightly phone call. I'll mention it nicely tomorrow. But the next morning, when Edith left for her volunteer shift at the library, Garrett's Tesla was still there. And when she returned 4 hours later, it hadn't moved an inch. This time, she knocked on his door. Garrett answered in designer athleisure wear, a green smoothie in hand, looking annoyed at the interruption. "Can I help you?" he asked, not unkindly, but with the tone of someone whose time was being wasted. "Hello, Garrett. I'm Edith, from next door. We met briefly when you moved in." Right, Edith. Hi." He took a long sip of his smoothie. "I wanted to mention that the parking spot in front of my house, where your car is now, that's generally understood to be my spot. I know it's public parking, but there's a kind of unspoken agreement on this street. Folks park in front of their own homes when possible." Garrett's expression shifted from mild annoyance to amused condescension. "Oh, I see. Well, Edith, as you pointed out, it's public parking. I actually checked the municipal code when we moved in. There are no assigned spots on this street. It's first come, first served. I understand that legally, and honestly," he continued, warming to his subject, "I think it's actually healthier for the neighborhood if we move away from these territorial attitudes. It's very insular, very exclusionary, actually. What if someone has guests? What if someone has multiple cars? The whole, 'this is my spot' mentality is kind of outdated, don't you think?" Edith felt her cheeks flush. "I'm 76 years old. I have a hip replacement. Parking 3 houses away isn't just an inconvenience. It's physically painful." Garrett's face softened slightly, but not enough. "I'm sorry about your hip. I really am. But that's not really my problem, is it? Maybe you could talk to the city about getting a disabled parking spot designated if you need one. There are proper channels for that." He closed the door before she could respond. For 2 weeks, Garrett's Tesla occupied Edith's spot every single day. She began setting her alarm for 6 a.m., hoping to catch him leaving for his morning gym session, but he worked from home and rarely moved his car before noon. The physical toll was real. Her hip throbbed constantly. She'd had to cancel one physical therapy appointment because she couldn't bear the thought of the extra walking. But more than the pain, there was the principle. Garrett's smug dismissal, his casual cruelty disguised as legal correctness, gnawed at her. She'd spent decades being a good neighbor, bringing casseroles when babies were born, organizing block parties, checking on elderly residents during storms. And this man, who lived here less than a year, was lecturing her about community values while causing her actual physical harm. Patricia was furious when she learned the situation had continued. "Mom, you need to do something. This is harassment." "It's not harassment, honey. He's technically right. It's a public spot." "Technically right is the worst kind of right," Patricia said. "There has to be something we can do." Edith tried the diplomatic approach first. She baked her famous lemon bars and brought them to Garrett and Chelsea with a handwritten note explaining her situation more fully, appealing to their compassion. The lemon bars were never acknowledged. The Tesla remained. She tried talking to Chelsea, hoping for a more sympathetic ear. Chelsea, it turned out, was a life coach who specialized in boundary setting and told Edith that holding space for your own needs without absorbing others' expectations was actually very empowering for everyone involved. The Tesla stayed put. Edith even tried the passive-aggressive approach, leaving increasingly pointed notes on his windshield. "Please consider elderly neighbors' mobility issues. Some of us actually need accessible parking." Kindness costs nothing. Garrett responded by posting in the neighborhood Facebook group about parking entitlement and the importance of following actual laws rather than made-up customs. The post went semi-viral within their small community. People took sides. A surprising number agreed with Garrett. "The boomers need to learn they don't own the street," one comment read. "Public parking is public," wrote another. But there were defenders too. Mrs. Johnson wrote a passionate essay about neighborhood courtesy. Mr. Martinez posted old photos of block parties where everyone respected the unwritten parking rules. Even the college kids chimed in, "Dude, just park somewhere else. It's not that deep." Garrett doubled down. "I paid a lot of money for this house," he wrote. "I have as much right to this street as anyone else. More, actually, since I'm contributing to property values instead of letting the neighborhood stagnate." That comment crossed a line for Edith. She might be old, but she wasn't obsolete. She wasn't stagnant. She was strategic. Edith had lived in Maple Grove long enough to understand something crucial about small-town power dynamics. Official rules mattered less than relationships. And she had relationships. She'd volunteered at the municipal library for 22 years. She'd served on the town planning committee for over a decade. She'd organized fundraisers for the fire department, helped campaign for 3 different mayors, and taught Sunday school at the First Presbyterian Church, where half the city council attended services. She started with a phone call to Dorothy Park, the city clerk she'd known since Dorothy was a nervous 23-year-old intern. "Dorothy, dear, I have a hypothetical question about parking regulations." Over coffee at Dorothy's office, Edith learned about reserved parking designations, the process for requesting them, and, most interestingly, the various legitimate grounds for approval. disability access, doctor's orders, safety concerns, and a category called special circumstances at the discretion of the city council. The disability route is most straightforward, Dorothy explained. With your hip replacement and your doctor's documentation, you'd have a strong case. How long does it take? Usually 6 to 8 weeks. There's an application, a review period, a council vote. Edith nodded, taking notes, but her mind was already working on a faster track. Her next stop was the office of Councilman Robert Pritchard. She'd known Bobby since he was a boy. She'd been his mother's best friend until Margaret passed away 4 years ago. Mrs. Owen, Bobby stood up from his desk, genuinely pleased to see her. What brings you by? She explained the situation, carefully framing it not as a petty neighborhood dispute, but as a matter of elder accessibility and neighborly consideration, values the town prided itself on. Bobby listened, his face growing more sympathetic. That's frustrating. This Mitchum guy sounds like a piece of work. I don't want to cause trouble, Edith said carefully. I just want to be able to get to my own home without pain. I'm not asking for anything unreasonable. You're not, Bobby agreed. Let me look into what we can do. The standard disabled parking process takes a while, but there might be options. Do you have documentation from your doctor about your mobility limitations? I can get it. Good. And Mrs. Owen, off the record, I remember what you did for my mom when she was sick. You were there every single day. I don't forget things like that. Dr. Ramesh Patel had been Edith's physician for 15 years. When she explained what she needed, he didn't hesitate. Edith, you should have asked for this months ago. Your post-surgical mobility restrictions are well documented. Extended walking, especially on uneven sidewalks, could compromise your recovery. This isn't a favor. This is legitimate medical necessity. The letter he wrote was thorough and clinical. Patient presence with limited mobility following right hip arthroplasty. Extended ambulation beyond 50 feet causes significant pain and risks compromising surgical outcomes. Recommend parking access within immediate proximity of residents for a minimum of 6 months, potentially extending to 1 year depending on rehabilitation progress. Armed with this documentation, Edith returned to City Hall, but now she had another ally, Frances O'Brien, the director of the Senior Services Department. Frances had moved to town 8 years ago, knowing no one. Edith had been one of the first to welcome her, inviting her to join the library volunteer program, introducing her around town, making sure she didn't feel like an outsider. Now, Frances ran a department with surprising influence over city accessibility initiatives. This is exactly the kind of situation our department was created to address, Frances told her, reviewing Dr. Patel's letter. Elder accessibility isn't just about ramps and grab bars. It's about enabling seniors to age in place with dignity. I don't want special treatment, Edith said. I just want reasonable accommodation. That's exactly what this is. Let me talk to the council members. I think we can expedite this. What Edith hadn't fully appreciated was how much her years of community service had banked goodwill. When Frances started making calls to council members, she discovered that Edith Owen wasn't just another senior citizen requesting parking. She was a local institution. Councilwoman Sarah Kim remembered Edith organizing meals for her family after Sarah's father died. Councilman James Walsh remembered Edith tutoring his dyslexic son in reading for 2 years, refusing any payment. Even the youngest council member, 29-year-old Marcus Thompson, had a connection. Edith had been his grandmother's best friend and had spoken beautifully at her funeral. Bobby Pritchard called Edith 3 days after her visit. "We're putting you on the agenda for this Thursday's council meeting. It'll be a quick vote. Reserved, disabled parking in front of your residence with appropriate signage. I've talked to everyone. It's going to pass unanimously." "That fast?" "That fast. Bring your documentation, say a few words about your situation, and we'll take care of it. Oh, and Mrs. Owen, you might want to notify your neighbor as a courtesy." Edith considered this. She could tell Garrett, give him a heads up, maybe even offer one final olive branch. Then she remembered his condescending, smoothie-sipping dismissal. His Facebook post calling her entitled, "Chelsea's Lecture About Boundaries." "I think I'll let the official notice be sufficient," she said. The Maple Grove City Council met in the basement of the municipal building every Thursday at 7 p.m. The meetings were sparsely attended, usually just department heads, the occasional concerned citizen, and Gerald Hoffman, a retired accountant who had attended every council meeting for 32 years and took meticulous notes that no one ever read. This Thursday was different. Word had gotten around the neighborhood about Edith's request. The college kids showed up. The Johnson and Martinez families came. Even a few people from the contentious Facebook thread appeared, curious to see how it would play out. Garrett and Chelsea Mitchum walked in at 6:58 p.m., looking confused and suspicious. The meeting opened with standard business, approving minutes, discussing a proposed ordinance about chicken coops, reviewing the recreation department budget. Edith sat patiently in the front row, her hands folded in her lap. Finally, Bobby Pritchard introduced the item: request for designated disabled parking space at 247 Maple Grove Avenue, resident Edith Owen. Francis O'Brien presented first, outlining the Senior Services Department's position on elder accessibility. Then Bobby invited Edith to speak. She stood slowly, letting her hip pain show naturally, not exaggerating but not hiding it either. "Thank you. Council members, my name is Edith Owen. I've lived at 247 Maple Grove Avenue for 43 years. I raised my children there. I taught half the adults in this town to read at the library. I've organized fundraisers, volunteered for every community event, and tried my best to be a good neighbor." She paused, making eye contact with each council member. 3 months ago, I had hip replacement surgery. My doctor, Dr. Patel, is here tonight and can speak to this. But the simple truth is that walking long distances causes me significant pain and could damage my recovery. For 40 years, I parked in front of my own home. It was an arrangement that worked for everyone, based on mutual respect and consideration. Another pause. She didn't look at Garrett, but she felt him shifting uncomfortably behind her. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for reasonable accommodation based on a legitimate medical need. My doctor has documented that I require parking within 50 feet of my residence. The space directly in front of my home is the only one that meets this requirement without requiring me to cross the street, which poses additional safety risks." Dr. Patel stood and briefly confirmed the medical necessity. Francis added context about similar accommodations approved in neighboring towns. Bobby asked if there were any questions from the council. Councilwoman Kim asked, "Has there been any objection from neighbors?" Before Bobby could respond, Garrett stood up. Yes, actually, I object. The room went silent. Even Gerald Hoffman looked up from his notes. Mr. Mitchum, Bobby said carefully. You'll have an opportunity to speak in a moment. Please wait until... This is ridiculous, Garrett continued, his voice rising. She's trying to privatize public parking because she doesn't want to walk an extra 100 feet. This sets a terrible precedent. What's next? Everyone over 65 gets their own personal parking space? Chelsea put a hand on his arm, but he shook it off. I pay taxes. I own property on that street. I have just as much right to that parking space as anyone else. More, actually, since my property taxes are probably higher than hers. This is age-based discrimination, and honestly, it's exactly the kind of entitled boomer nonsense that's holding this town back from progress. The room erupted. Mrs. Johnson gasped audibly. One of the college kids muttered, "Dude, read the room." Marcus Thompson looked like he wanted to climb over the desk and personally escort Garrett out. Bobby gavelled for order. Mr. Mitchum, you're out of line. This is a council meeting, not a debate forum. You'll have an opportunity for public comment at the appropriate time, but you will show respect for the proceedings and for Mrs. Owen. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking, Garrett said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. He looked around and seemed to realize, perhaps for the first time, that nobody was on his side. Even the people who supported him on Facebook looked uncomfortable. If you cannot conduct yourself appropriately, you'll be removed, Bobby said firmly. Now sit down. Garrett sat, his face flushed. Bobby turned back to the council. Any other questions? No. Then I moved to approve the request for designated disabled parking at 247 Maple Grove Avenue with appropriate signage, including tow-away notice. Do I have a second? Second, said Sarah Kim immediately. All in favor? 6 hands rose simultaneously. Motion passes unanimously. Mrs. Owen, the Department of Public Works will install the signage within 5 business days. You'll receive official documentation in the mail. Edith stood, thanked the council, and walked slowly out of the room. She didn't look at Garrett. She didn't need to. She'd won. The sign went up on a Tuesday morning, exactly 5 business days later. It was official, municipal grade. Impossible to miss. Reserved disabled parking permits, said DPH 24724. Unauthorized vehicles will be towed at owner's expense. Violators subject to $250 fine city ordinance 42.7b. The public works crew, led by Tom Patterson, whose daughter Edith had tutored in reading 20 years ago, made sure it was perfectly positioned, completely level, and secured with enough concrete to withstand a hurricane. There you go, Mrs. Owen, Tom said. Anyone parks here now, you just call the non-emergency line, and we'll have them towed within the hour. The city's got a contract with Mike's towing. Mike owes you a favor anyway after you helped his wife with that library job application. I remember, Edith said, though I'm sure it won't come to that. Tom grinned. Well, if it does, Mike's impound lot is clear out on Route 7, 25-mile drive. $300 to get your car out, and they're only open from 9 to 5 on weekdays. When Edith returned from her morning errands, she pulled into her spot, her legally designated, officially sanctioned, city-approved spot, and felt a satisfaction deeper than the moment warranted. This wasn't just about parking. It was about respect. It was about community. It was about understanding that technically legal wasn't the same as right, and that a functioning society ran on unwritten rules of decency as much as official ordinances. Garrett's Tesla was parked 2 houses down. For 3 days, an uneasy peace prevailed on Maple Grove Avenue. Garrett parked elsewhere without incident. Edith reclaimed her routine: library volunteering, physical therapy, coffee with friends, without the constant low-grade dread of returning home to find her spot occupied. Then, on Friday evening, Edith returned from dinner at Patricia's house to find Garrett's Tesla in her spot. She sat in her car for a moment, genuinely surprised. She'd expected him to be smarter than this. She called the non-emergency police number. Maple Grove Police, how can I help you? Hello, this is Edith Owen at 21047 Maple Grove Avenue. There's a vehicle illegally parked in my designated disabled parking space. I need it towed, please. Can you confirm the space has proper signage? Yes, city installed sign. Permit number DPH 24724. And the vehicle doesn't have a disability permit displayed? No permit visible. Okay, we'll dispatch an officer to verify, and if the vehicle is in violation, we'll have it towed. This will take about 30 minutes. Edith parked across the street and waited on her front porch. Officer Denise Martinez, no relation to the neighbors, but she'd been a student in Edith's adult literacy class years ago, arrived 23 minutes later. She examined the sign, checked the Tesla for any displayed permits, took photos, and made a call. 12 minutes after that, Mike's towing truck rumbled up the street. Mike himself was driving. He gave Edith a friendly wave before efficiently hooking up the Tesla. The whole operation took less than 10 minutes. Several neighbors had come out to watch. Mrs. Johnson filmed on her phone. The college kids cheered when the truck drove away. Garrett came running out of his house just as the tow truck turned the corner. Where's my car? Officer Martinez handed him a citation. Your vehicle was parked illegally in a designated disabled space. It's been towed to the city impound lot. Here's the address and the information for retrieval. This is insane. You can't just tow people's cars. Actually, sir, we can. The signage clearly states that unauthorized vehicles will be towed. You parked in a legally designated disabled space without a permit. That's a $250 fine, plus towing and storage fees. This is harassment. I'm calling my lawyer. That's your right, sir. In the meantime, the impound lot is open Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Have a good evening. Officer Martinez returned to her patrol car. Garrett stood on the sidewalk, holding the citation, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and dawning realization. Edith stood up from her porch chair and walked slowly to her front door. As she reached for the handle, she turned back. Garrett, she called out. Her voice was kind, grandmotherly even. There's a perfectly good spot right in front of your own house. You might consider parking there from now on. It's the neighborly thing to do. She went inside before he could respond. The neighborhood Facebook group exploded over the weekend. Garrett posted a long, furious screed about government overreach, elderly entitlement, and weaponizing disability accommodations for petty revenge. The response was not what he expected. Dude, you literally parked in a disabled spot. This is like parking in a handicapped spot at the grocery store and being surprised you got towed. The sign says Towaway Zone. What did you think would happen? Maybe try being a decent human being instead of technically correct for once? Even the people who'd initially supported his public parking is public stance had turned, because whatever the philosophical merits of his position, he'd crossed a clear line. He'd knowingly parked in a disabled spot. Chelsea, reading the comments over his shoulder, said quietly, "Maybe we should just drop this." But Garrett couldn't let it go. On Monday, he drove to City Hall after retrieving his car for $375 in total fees and demanded to speak to someone about the Owens situation. He was directed to Francis O'Brien. "Mr. Mitchum, please sit down. I want to file a complaint. That parking designation is fraudulent. She's not that disabled. I've seen her walking around just fine. This whole thing is retaliation for a personal dispute." Francis pulled out a thick file. "Mr. Mitchum, I have here Mrs. Owens' medical documentation, reviewed and approved by both her physician and the city's medical consultant. I have photos of the surgery scar from her hip replacement. I have physical therapy reports documenting her limited mobility. I have a notarized statement from her doctor explaining the medical necessity of proximate parking." She slid the file across the desk. "I also have letters from 17 different community members attesting to her community service and the legitimacy of her request. I have records showing similar accommodations approved for 6 other elderly residents in town. And I have a recording of last week's council meeting where you called her entitled and accused her of holding the town back." Garrett said nothing. Mrs. Owens' parking designation was approved through proper legal channels based on legitimate medical need. The fact that you also happen to have been a bad neighbor doesn't make it fraudulent. It just makes you the reason she finally bothered to formalize something she could have done years ago. Francis leaned forward. "Now, you can continue to make a fuss about this. You can file complaints and appeals and maybe even lawsuits. You can keep posting on Facebook about how unfair it all is. But I promise you, Mr. Mitchum, you will not win. Not legally, not socially, and not morally." She stood up, indicating the meeting was over. "Or, and hear me out, you could park in front of your own house. Let a 76-year-old woman with a hip replacement park in front of hers, and try being the kind of neighbor people actually want to have around. Radical thought, I know, but you might consider it." Garrett left without another word. 3 weeks later, Edith was pruning her rose bushes when Chelsea Mitchum walked over, hesitant and alone. "Mrs. Owen, could I talk to you for a minute?" Edith set down her pruning shears. "Of course, dear." "I wanted to apologize for everything. Garrett doesn't always think about how his actions affect other people. He gets very focused on being right according to the rules, and he loses sight of just being kind." "And where is Garrett now?" "Inside, too proud to apologize himself. But we've been talking a lot about what happened, about how we've been his neighbors." Chelsea twisted her hands together. "I grew up in the suburbs, different houses every few years because of my dad's job. I never really learned how to be part of a community. Garrett's from Silicon Valley. His whole worldview is disruption and efficiency and optimizing systems." "But neighborhoods aren't systems," Edith said gently. "No, they're not. We're learning that. Slowly." Chelsea paused. "I read some of the things people wrote about you online, about all the things you've done for this community over the years. I don't think we understood who you are. We just saw an old lady who wanted special treatment. And now I see someone who's earned a little consideration, and more importantly, someone who shouldn't have needed to earn it in the first place. You have a hip replacement. You needed accessible parking. We should have just been nice about it from the beginning." Edith nodded. "That would have been preferable, yes. I brought you something." Chelsea held out a small package wrapped in brown paper. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I wanted you to have it. Inside was a beautiful handcrafted journal with Edith embossed on the cover. It's from a small business in town. The owner said you helped her get a small business loan years ago when she was just starting out. Edith smiled. Linda Hoffman. Yes, I remember. This is lovely, Chelsea. Thank you. Would it be okay if maybe sometime I could come by for coffee? I'd like to learn more about the neighborhood, about how things work here, the unwritten rules and the history and all of that. I think we've been trying to move into a community without actually joining it. I'd like that very much, Edith said. How about Thursday afternoon? Chelsea nodded gratefully and turned to leave, then stopped. Mrs. Owen? Garrett really is a good person underneath all the Garrettness. He volunteers with a literacy program for kids. He mentors junior engineers. He's just really bad at neighborhoods. Then it's fortunate he has you to help him learn, Edith said, and a whole street full of people willing to give him another chance if he's willing to take it. After Chelsea left, Edith sat on her porch with a cup of tea and watched the evening settle over Maple Grove Avenue. The Tesla was parked in front of the Mitchum house. Her spot, her official, legal, sign-posted spot, sat empty, waiting for her when she needed it. She thought about power and community, about official rules and unwritten ones, about the difference between being right and being good. The parking space wars were over, not because anyone had technically won or lost, but because both sides had finally agreed on what they were actually fighting about. It was never really about the parking. It was about being seen, being respected, being part of something larger than yourself. And in the end, a 76-year-old woman with a hip replacement and 4 decades of community service had taught a young couple the most important lesson about neighborhoods. You get what you give. Edith finished her tea, stood up slowly, her hips still ached, but less than before, and went inside. Tomorrow, she'd bake lemon bars for Thursday's coffee with Chelsea. Some traditions were worth maintaining. Well, that's the end of the story. Do you think it ended well? What would you do if you were in Edith's shoes? Would you have done the same? Please, let's have your comment, and please subscribe and share for more stories.